And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 228. Today we're going to be talking about the notion of February, photographing February, but not the kind of Valentine's February, but more the kind of what the weather's doing, when we often feel like we're in this sort of almost brutal conflict between deep winter and possibly the first signs of spring. Well, that is if you're in the kind of Northern Hemisphere, Western world type of thing. Slightly different if you're in India or in the Southern Hemisphere. So yeah, that's really what we're going to be chatting about. Stick around. So yes, welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you're looking to improve your photography, then you're in the right place. So we're here live on YouTube, in which case if you are watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here, let me know where you are, let me know what the weather's up to, and we can make a start on that. If you're not watching live, but you're watching one of the recorded versions, and of course there's another 227 other episodes of this but there's also a playlist as well. Actually, if you look into the notes below now, I've just, at the top there, I've put the playlist. So if you want, you can just kind of click on that and scroll back through and find ones that you're interested in. But you can also leave comments on any of these as well. And of course, you can do the usual subscribe, click the bell for notifications. And if you happen to like any of them, then click the like button. YouTube does always quite like the helps the algorithms as such. Right, a couple of other quick bits of housekeeping before we start. I thought the computer was probably fixed last week when something was done with the CPU, only I've since had it freeze and restart on me again. So there's still potential for the fact that it could disappear on me. If it does, stick around. I'll try and leave a comment in the comments. Hopefully, if it restarts itself, I could be back here within 2 or 3 minutes. So don't run off immediately. If I can't get it restarted, I'll leave a message to say so. But hopefully everything should be okay. And right, well, I can see we've got a couple of comments in already. So let's say hello to a few people. So April says, greetings from a snow-covered ground in Long Island, New York. Nadia says, hi everyone from a dull and wet Fife. Adrian says, greetings from a slightly overcast and reasonable South Lincolnshire. Reasonable, that's a word, isn't it? Where you think, well, what is reasonable? But I guess if you're thinking at this time of year, you're not expecting heat waves and maybe it's not too cold, not too damp. VG says, hello everyone, a pleasant night in Chennai. Well, of course in Chennai, February is winter, but it's not winter as we know it in Britain or the US. Or northern parts of the US or Canada or various other parts, but I think it is supposed to. Everything I see tends to say if you're going to southern India, recommended to go pretty much at this time of year when the heat becomes a little bit more tolerable. Nick says hello from Bath, overcast and cold. Viji says she's never seen snow. You certainly get snow in the northern part of India. You need to head up there. The right time of year. I seem to remember you were going to once before, VG, but circumstances got in the way. I hope you managed to enjoy it at some point. April says it's very pretty, just a pain to shovel and clean your car. Right, and little bits of chat going on. Janet says hi from a snowy Mississauga, 10 centimetres last night. 10 centimetres fall of snow. That's a chunk. It's 4 inches, I think. Becca joins us from Ayrshire. Says, I was on the other side of the camera last week modelling for a friend who's doing a photography course at college. She had to do a tartan fashion shoot. That was good fun. It's always a very different thing to be on the other side of the camera. A lot of people who do photography, one of the reasons they do the photography is so that they are the person holding the camera, so that they don't have to be on the other side of it. We've certainly had a few conversations along that line before now. Adrian says, not too cold, not tropical though by any means. Not in southern Lincolnshire, no. Not damp currently. VG's, confirming my memory was right. She was planning a trip that I had to cancel. I think it was a year or two ago. Right, okay, so we have people in, we have conversation. Oh, another thing you might note, the lighting's slightly different. I am attempting to go with window light today. If it starts getting too dark, then I may just have to go over and switch a light on. But slowly but surely the nights are getting sort of slightly shorter after. So I don't know. I'm hoping I prefer the natural window light to come in, especially since I moved my desk closer to the window. So that's something else. Also, what else have we got? Smug Points. Yes, a quick Smug Points update. Well, of course, everything being chaotic with me not being sure what the computer's doing and all the rest of it means that, yeah, things have just kind of been ticking along. You get your 5 Smug Points for turning up and saying hello and live and writing. And so essentially we're at a point now where I'm combining January and February, and then when we get to a kind of February total, then there will be a Smug Points winner who gets to choose the following challenge. Oh, Meg's joined us and says hello everyone too. But currently on 30 Smug Points with the kind of January, February combined, we have April, Susan, Nadia, Janet, Meg and Becca. And then on 25 we have Robert Gullick and John Harvey. And then everybody else is on 20 or below. But I'm going to be setting a challenge at the end of this podcast, so stick around for that. So that gives you a chance to get 10 extra Smug Points for entering the challenge. And there's a potential bonus 30, 20 and 10 Smug Points for my top 3 as well. So we will chat more about that as well. Oh, Marilyn's joined us as well, says good morning from Colorado. Welcome, Marilyn. Okay, so what are we talking about? So today then we're talking about the notion of nature in February. It's one of those things. I was trying to think of a topic, and I've talked before about the fact that one of the things I've been doing quite a lot of in recent times is I use my phone. Every time I go out for a walk, I've got my phone on me, and I've started trying to get into a habit of just seeing if there's anything vaguely interesting to photograph. And what I've noticed about this time of year, here in Scotland, winter just feels like it goes on forever. Much more so than when I used to live down in the south of England. Although Britain isn't a huge country, there is quite a bit of a difference between the south coast of England and by the time you get to Scotland, and even more by the time you get to the north part of Scotland or even the Outer Hebrides as well. Very different kind of weather patterns. But there's nearly always something interesting to find. And here we are in February. February is one of those months which just feels, like I said, it's a battleground. No 2 Februaries are ever alike. Whereas Januaries are very often, okay, it might snow, it might not. But it's very often cold, it's damp, it's overcast. There's not a lot of difference in the weather between the beginning of January and the end of January. And a lot of months are kind of like that. But some months can be a bit more extreme. March can be quite an extreme month as well. But February is one of those where it can be absolutely anything. It can be cold and you can be knee-deep in snow. Alternatively, sometimes you get these really kind of warm spring days, which are entirely different. And you can have essentially somewhere between 20 degrees, 25 Celsius difference from one part of February to another February, or one February to another year on year. So what do we do then with that notion of if we want to take photos? And I thought, well, okay, what I'll do then is let's talk about the idea of opportunities. What can you do with your camera or your phone at this time of year when mostly we really just want to kind of hunker down and hibernate for the most part? And I understand, of course, obviously exceptional for you, different for you, VG, in India, where the weather's warmer, but that's okay. I still want your interpretation of February too, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a challenge for 2 weeks' time, the essentially February Nature Challenge. So like I say, nature as opposed to, I'm not looking for Valentine's people kind of things. I'm looking for, landscapes and, well, I'll tell you what, I'll go into more detail on that later. A couple of more people have joined us. This side towards screen says good morning all. Now, funny feeling, is that Jeffrey? I think it was Jeffrey. Welcome back. And John Harvey also says good day to all from Ohio. So this idea then of February. So let me throw up a couple of photos to kind of make a start, show you what I'm talking about. So this one, most of the photos I'm going to show you are phone photos, not all, but I'll talk you through some of them. Here is this kind of typical winter tree, as if it's in Castle Douglas. If you're heading out the north end of Castle Douglas, or northeast diagonal of Castle Douglas, along NSB Road, if you look over to the right, it's empty fields, and there's this tree. There's this big old oak tree just sits in the field. And I've kind of got into a habit of periodically I will photograph it through the seasons. And there's a bit of stone wall that I can sort of sit my phone on and more or less get the same angle each time. And so this is what it would look like, say, on a day like today. I mean, fractionally more cloud than there is, but there are one or two little patches of blue sky. So this is not too dissimilar to what it would look like today. And yet, at the same time, what could happen is a day later, a day earlier, a morning later or earlier, you can have this. There's been a coating of snow. And when I guess April was talking about snow on the ground in Long Island, New York, maybe it's this level, maybe it's deeper, not sure. But that notion of the kind of dusting, it's come down, and then so likewise you could wake up in the morning and see this, and by lunchtime it's gone back to this. So there's something kind of interesting. I mean, so if you're looking at that idea of what could I photograph, one of the options you can do is find something which is noticeably different depending on the weather. I've got a friend, Deborah, who she actually has this little Buddha statue out on a table in the garden, which she regularly photographs from her window, basically looking out into the garden. And there's times when it's covered deep in snow, there's times when it's soaking wet in rain, there's times when it's sort of the mist and fog is around it. And so if you've got an object, certainly if it's at a little bit of a distance, something like a tree or a building across a road, or something something you regularly pass, or something that you see from your place where you live, and you constantly take it from exactly the same angle, then through the seasons you will notice changes, and that can be a kind of fun thing to do as well. So certainly in the winter, the difference between heavy rain, fog and mist, snow, or bright and sunny and clear, or frosty, can make quite a difference to exactly the same object. So that's certainly one of the things I would sort of have a think about. I can see I've got another comment here. Adrian says almost monochromatic infrared with the tree photo. Yeah, that's true. When you take photos in the snow, very often it kind of decolorizes, sort of desaturates. Everything kind of can become quite monochrome. Jeffrey says snow is the saving grace in landscape in February photography. Other than that, there's not much colour other than grey. It's true, but then there's also a notion of trying to lean into those greys. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. We'll work our way through. So, okay, if we figure back then, let me, this one, right. So, yes, that, if you say, as Adrian said, it becomes really quite monochromatic. Once you get, I mean, you can see a little bit of green here, but once it's kind of disappeared, you've just got that white landscape, and then everything kind of feels like it's shadow and stuff. But other options, I mean, again, snow, buildings, perspective, tracks are another good one if you do have snow or something like that, or likewise country roads, or maybe mud, you know, deep tracks. The tractors have left the deep tire marks in the mud, things like that. So but tracks, I mean, I've got car tracks here obviously in the snow, but for those of you who are kind of slightly into your wildlife or are going out into the animal tracks are another, because if you've got snow or you've got mud, then prints can be left, whether it's footprints, well, it could be footprints from a dog that you've taken for a walk, or it could be little bird footprints, or squirrels, or bears, or something, depending on where you live. Obviously, don't tend to get quite so many bears here in Castle Douglas. Excuse me. But there's that notion then of snow. And likewise then, I mean, this is kind of getting out into it, as it's actually snowing. Or there's that kind of residual. This one here taken from my stepdaughter's window. So we've got Carling Walk Loch at the bottom of Castle Douglas. It's frozen here. It has snowed. It's sunset, sun just disappearing over the horizon. That little red glow just hitting the tip of the hills in the distance. And then in the foreground, gardens with bits of snow and frost and ice over it, and a wrecked trampoline. probably didn't. So I think this was before the big storm we had, so probably a previous storm that had done that. But if you've got clear nights, if you've got clear evenings, and you can get that sunset, you get little bits of colour. You know, it's completely the opposite of that monochromatic tree. Then those kind of reds and yellows and golds, or even the kind of bluish purplish tints that you can get into snow. The snow really kind of takes on and bounces different kind of colours around. So you can actually get really colourful photos if you start playing around with that. What's that? VG says, oh, beautiful golden sky and snow. And Becca says, we don't get much snow in Ayr, so February is mostly... Oh yes, that was Becca saying about mostly shades. Oh no, actually, sorry, Jeffrey had already said about mostly shades of grey, and Becca's echoing that idea. Not much snow in Ayr, so mostly various shades of mud and grey. But again, I think there's ways of leaning into that. Well, if I show you the next photo then, like this one. So here we have frozen loch. So this is the same loch that I just showed you here. So this loch, Carling Walk loch. But instead of being taken from this angle, if we go and sort of tuck down behind the tree as the loch comes round the edge there, this is where I'm taking this next photo from. So this is down at the edge of the loch, and when it was frozen, and it's frozen, and there's bits of frost sitting on top of a lump of wood that has got kind of an old tree stump that's got frozen into the loch. On top of that, we've got various bits of wood and stones where I think local people, possibly local youth, have gone, I wonder how hard that ice is, and they've lobbed a stone or a large piece of wood onto the ice to see if it will crack the ice, and it hasn't. It's just bounced and sort of gone out. And again, we can see sort of larger bits of stones and stuff like that here. But colour-wise, it's what Becca says about muds and greys. There's not a lot of colour. It's just browns and greys, and it's desaturated, and yet, there is a beauty in that. There's a melancholic beauty in it. Not everything has to be vibrant golds or blues to be interesting, or likewise monochromatic. I think there's something about it. It's not necessarily easy to get a kind of a good sense of those greys and browns, but it's worth pursuing, I think. And so this kind of idea, so certainly if it's frozen, get yourself near water. Whether it's a frozen river or a frozen lake or even frozen puddles. Now you can do this kind of wide landscape idea, or lochscape as such, or you can get in really close. And one of the things I did on the same loch, a little bit further round, there was a bit where there was a boat slope, a bit of where it just was, essentially there's like almost like a road that goes. It's the word, I can't think of the word, slipway, going down into the water. And the loch was frozen, but I wasn't totally sure how thick it was, but because it was a slope going down, I could sort of edge out onto the ice and walk out onto the ice with the idea that, well, if it did start cracking, you know, I wasn't sort of stepping over deep water, because you've always got to be really careful if you're stepping on ice. But what I did then, that allowed me to get out onto the ice just about 2 or 3 feet. And then I looked down, and we had these incredible patterns here where you've got all the air bubbles trapped in the ice, and then you've got cracks going along the ice. And there's something, you know, beautifully abstract about this line, and again, very monochromatic. I mean, it is a colour photo, it's not black and white, but of course it's showing no colour. Although, I mean, trapped down here, looks like there's a leaf or something maybe just trapped under the ice there as well. So if you can actually sort of get to the edge of the ice and you can find things that are frozen within it, like I say, I mean, this could just be a puddle as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a whole loch as such. And what's that? Oh, Meg says, I really like the diagonal lines on this one. And yes, well, there's another thing, you see, is that notion of playing around with diagonals. If you're pointing straight down, there's no other reference point. We don't know which way round I'm holding the camera. So you can play with that. Move your phone, move your camera, rotate it. And if there is a nice strong line like this one, put it on the diagonal. Because as we've talked before, diagonals can add a level of energy and dynamism to an image, whereas straight horizontals and verticals tend to add stability. So depending on what kind of mood you're wanting to get, sometimes making sure some of these cracks have, you make a stronger diagonal out of it, can kind of add just that slight extra level of energy towards it. So there's that notion that you can kind of get in almost macro level, or certainly fill the frame. Remember on the whole notion of fill the frame, where you don't have edges, where you don't, and without the edges, you don't have the same frame of reference. So you don't really know how big or how small this is, how close you are, how far away. So it's perfect for that abstract notion of then what we're playing around with is tone and line, and seeing what we can create out of that. And this is really what it's all about. What I think is there's a notion here that what I'm trying to do when I talk about going out with my phone, and I'm taking photos, and some of you have seen that I've got, I have a second Instagram account called Kim Ayres Phone Pics. And for that, it's not my big photography, it's not my importance photography, it's not the stuff that I put out there in the world to try and promote that I'm a photographer, come and buy my services. It's what I call observational photography. It's like playing scales if you're a musician. It's like doing thumbnail sketches if you're an artist. It's a way of keeping my hand in, a way of keeping my eye in. So what happens is, in any situation you're in, you go, what can I create that's interesting with this? Is there an interest, that little bit of moss that's sticking out of the wall there? You know, how can I angle the camera so that bit of moss looks interesting? Or that bit of, that little bit of ice that's, or that leaf, or that puddle, or that grate, iron grate in the road, or something like that. And so you've got this notion of what can I find interesting? And I think this is really where I'm trying to come from with this idea of February. I think we can sort of go, well, big landscapes, we don't have, new shoots, we don't have beautiful sunsets, we don't have glory or whatever. There you say grey and dull, but what can you create within the grey and dull? And primarily, that's what I'm trying to get you to start thinking. What do we have here? April says, yes, ice can have lots of shapes in it. Jeffrey says, I found icicles against a blue sky and sun refracted can be beautiful. Yes, absolutely. Ice can be fantastic. And then if you can get light into it, particularly backlight, works really well. Susan says, I love abstract ice images. Such a lot going on to look at. Right, okay. Next, what do I want to move us on to? Okay, also that idea, then playing around with ice as well. If you want to get macro, if you've got macro lens, or you've got a macro option on your phone, or like we've talked before about with your phone, I'll tell you what, let's just flick back for a moment. A jeweler's loop, right? One of these little things are brilliant, and you can stick them over your phone, and instantly you've got a magnifying, you've got macro lens, and you can get in really, really close. And I'm sure we talked about that once before, or a couple of times before on previous things. So if you want to do macro, and this here is frost. This isn't snow. It's actually it's when we had sort of several frosty days in a row, and this is frost on frost on frost. Just started building up in layers, but it's in the grass. And again, now, if you've got a macro lens, you can either kind of get down low and take your photo there, or, again, your phone, you can just get, the great thing about the phone, the fantastic thing about the phone, is you can just get right down to ground level ever so easily. And you don't end up with an ear full of dirt or ice or anything else. April says she likes the frost macro. Another version of it is this was using my proper nice macro lens on my big camera. Well, that allowed me, this was another frost on frost on frost thing, and this was shot in February, and at this point you're able to get into that whole kind of geometric ice crystal patterns within and then sort of the bouquet of the different layers and levels and what have you. We're getting back into very abstract, but it can be really, really kind of fun and interesting if you just say, well, But whether it's ice or whether it's mud or whether it's a leaf or whether it's a leaf with a bit of frost on it, these things can always be really interesting. Adrian says, I love proper camera macro frost pick, stunning. Thank you. But again, frost with the phone, you take something like this. I mean, this was interesting. Again, popping around to see my stepdaughter, and one of the houses next door, sitting outside, couple of old bikes and a pair of boots. I don't know whether someone, I don't know whether they've sort of been forgotten about somewhere along the line, but there was something about the way the frost was sitting on the boots. And essentially you then have a still life sitting. Now, it's something about, you'll look down from head height and go, oh, okay, there's a bike, there's bits of plastic, there's boots, old boots or whatever. But there was something about it where I thought, oh, could I get something? And again, getting the phone, putting it down at ground level and just kind of isolating the boots and the bits behind it creates something interesting, just capturing the frost on it. There's texture there. There's something kind of real about this. And if you want, you can also take the same thing and then switch it into black and white. Play around with your different kind of black and white conversions as well. This one has a very slight kind of sepia hint to it as well, which then makes it almost timeless. This could be a shot from 60 years ago. So there's plenty to kind of explore there as well. What have we got here? Okay, so just saw another comment, oh yeah, it was John. It says, snow and ice are great for making interesting photos, but I hate dealing with the cold. This is true. And if you are going to go out and deal with the cold, couple of options. One, make sure you've got good gloves. But there are different kinds. I got a pair of gloves a couple of years ago as a Christmas present, which they're like mittens, but they've got like you can flip the lid back, and they're like fingerless gloves. And then you can put the lid back on, and then they're like thick mittens again. And I find those really quite useful. Problem is, if you're wearing thick gloves all the time, is if you're trying to operate the camera, or your phone for that matter, because it's heat sensitive and won't work through the gloves. Having said that, if you want to go, you can get these little, where have I got? I'm sure I've got one kicking around here, little pen type, yeah. Here we go. So, you can get these little mini pen sticks. You get them for, and they've got like a little rubber kind of silicone thing on the end. And you can use them for your tablet or your phone and what have you. And then actually you can just mark directly on the screen like that. Now, if you've got one of these and you're operating a phone while you're out, then you can have your thick gloves on all you like, as long as you can pluck this out of your pocket and hold it. You can then operate your phone using one of these. Does save the fingers a little bit. April says she has fingerless gloves. Yeah, they're great until it gets too cold on your fingers. So something like that's an option. Or if you have a phone itself, which also has a kind of touch screen option on it. Mine does. I tend to keep forgetting. I'm so used to just pressing all the buttons and focusing it in the way that I want to. I forget that actually I can, if I want, operate it from the screen behind. Right, okay, so there's that notion then of snow, ice, getting in close, but also is doing kind of wider landscapes, whether it's frozen lochs or it's the sunset light glinting off the glinting off the snow in the ice, things like that. Adrian says some gloves now have a capacitive material to use a phone without taking them off. Ah, right, okay, so you'll actually have the gloves with something like this little silicone type thing on the top, and that will, on the fingertips, he says. That's quite handy. Yeah, it rings a bell now you mention it, and I've completely forgotten about that. But yes, that sounds good, interesting. Thanks for that reminder. So yes, something else to go out and take a look at. I would imagine actually, if you've got the silicone on the fingertips, it might actually make it easier for if you're manually operating your camera as well, because you've got something to grip slightly. Okay, other options. So yes, we've been talking about ice, we've been talking about snow, but mist. Don't forget, of course, that also very often this time of year, you can get fog and mist and things like that. And at that point, this one go black and white. Again, mist has a tendency, a bit like snow, to desaturate under the best of conditions. So if you then, you can, in this case, lean into it, do a full black and white conversion with it as well. And we talked a lot before, I mean, about that notion of mist. Mist and fog works really well when you've got layers going back. And so in this case, we've got, the sheep in the foreground, but then we've got wall and tree further back, and then some bit of hill just disappearing into the distance behind it. Or likewise, if you want to do mist and night, that notion, if you can find an avenue of trees, or you can find a length of lamp posts, as well as the light disappears as it goes further into the distance. But February, very often, I do feel it can be a misty month, a bit like, in autumn, the other kind of end of it, around October. You quite often get a lot of mist. I tend to find in February you quite get mist as well. John says, yeah, mist and fog are great for making photos. So there's a lot of option there. And again, you don't have to necessarily worry about colour. The fact that most of, back to the muddy browns and the greys being the kind of dominant colours, doesn't really matter so much with a mist, because you're going for tone rather than colour as the way to define your photo. Then there's the notion of night. And this one, mist and night and full moon. Depending on how much you want to kind of get out. I mean, what I was doing here, in order to find images for this, I was going back through some of my folders looking for Februaries and seeing if anything leapt out that was interesting. And this one, we had, this is Loch Ken, and Loch about 10-15 miles up the road from where I am, just south of New Galloway. And it was a dead still night, so the water was absolutely perfectly calm. And it had been misty driving through, but then the mist started to lift a bit, but not completely. And so we end up with this wonderful kind of absolute mirror reflection on the loch, with the moon just hazing through it all. And it becomes very, very atmospheric. So a lot of fun to be had with that as well. Another option here, I think it was on, something might have been a different night here, is actually where I drove. Yes, it was a different one, because I got above the mist. It was a freezing cold night, and this is the moon up here, and slightly longer exposure. And when it's that we tend to think of nighttime as actually being more like that, desaturated. But if you give it enough exposure, the amount of light that's actually reflecting off the moon, all the colour is still here. And what happened is, if we look down here, you can see the big bank of mist. And in fact, it was a freezing mist, and there was even frost on the grass. But then I sort of drove up the road, and I came above the mist. And when I got above the mist, then we've got this sort of little backcountry road here. We've got the trees, but we've also got that layer of mist over here. We've got the shadows on the trees as well. But this likewise taken in February, when you can have those really cold, clear nights. And if you can kind of combine bits of mist, it can be quite dramatic. Well, VG says, noted for foggy mornings. And Adrian says, on a tripod, assume long exposure. Yes, what was the... Actually, I'll tell you what, if I just click that... No, where am I? There's a button I can click over here. There we go. And I can tell you exactly what the exposure time was this. Yes, this was a 30-second exposure. F7.1 ISO 800. So 30-second exposure on an F7.1. So I wanted 7.1. I wanted to get the depth. I didn't want it just sort of only focusing on the tree here and then going out of focus. I wanted to get enough of the sort of sharpness into the background and still to be able to see the stars likewise up in the sky. And you can see actually the fact that they've started to stretch out these stars out. That's always the sign of a slightly longer exposure. Once you've got about 15 seconds or something like that, the stars themselves start to smear. As the world turns, the stars themselves smear. Right, so if I just take that off, drag that back here, and move on to the next photo to show you now. Yes, so this was another example that I wanted to show you, was the notion of when you decide to go full landscape and really grab the weather patterns. Now this is where you can see, if you can get a decent kind of height and you can get a distance and you've got a landscape, you can sometimes see the weather as it moves across the landscape. And I remember this in particular, you could see the rains in the distance and they were coming across and sweep, and then suddenly you've got all these layers building up and it really felt quite dramatic. Now I had to do a little bit of editing to sort of bring a bit more texture out of it from the original, but it was worth it. And again, not a lot in the way of colours. It's still muddy, browny, you know, desaturated greens and greys, and yet there's drama in it. And so this notion of the weather patterns, if you've got the wind and the rain, if you've got the snow and the sleet, weather can really kind of create something interesting. And if it's clear and you don't have any of that, then there's that notion of the sunrise, sunset and the colours, those golden colours reflecting as well. And then if it's just dull grey overcast, look for the notion of shape and silhouette and stuff. So lots of possibilities playing around with landscapes in February. Another option here is, again, that kind of getting in close. And one of the things so this is hydrangea flower. That's just, you know, the hydrangeas, certain flowers, they somehow seem to survive the storms, a lot of them. And you end up with just this kind of skeletal effect going on, and you can play around. So with this case going along with you know, the 5-pointed shape, but there was another place where I was out for my walk and I found another hydrangea, and the winter sun low in the sky, slightly orange, you know, that yellowy golden kind of thing, backlight, you know, constantly going on. Backlight is our secret weapon. So if you're seeing the light hitting flowers, dead flowers, leaves, anything like that, and you can get the backlight, that can really enhance and lift your photo. And in this case here, it's the same kind of petals, but the middles of the petals, we're just left with a kind of skeletal remains. It's almost like coral in some ways. Really quite beautiful, quite fascinating. Again, this is just done with the phone, nothing, no fancy camera lenses or anything like that. And just by, you know, pointing it, angling it so that I wasn't getting, because this was on the edge of somebody's garden as I was walking past it. I didn't want to get the house in the background, so I moving the camera back and forth slightly because I wanted to get the backlight, didn't want to get the house in, but I wanted to get more of the hydrangea bush itself as a kind of background, so that this felt kind of isolated. Oh, Robert's joined us from Texas. It's overcast, rainy morning, I think he says. Other ideas, again, the snowdrops. That actually, despite the fact that it's February, there are some flowers that do start to make themselves felt. And this was kind of what put me in mind of this idea of February nature in the first place, is the fact that it can feel like it really is the heart of winter. You know, there are no leaves on the trees. Everything feels like it's in hibernation, except for the fact that you do still get some of the first flowers coming out. And then those snowdrops, they're not spring. And they're almost like a false hope for spring. Oh, there's flowers appearing. Spring must be nearby. Spring still feels too far away for me. But there is something beautiful about those snowdrops coming up. And once again, you get your phone, you can get right down to ground level. And as we can see here, a little bit of backlight off to one side. Gives us a little kind of streak of light coming through here. Adds to a little bit of atmosphere. And the trees in the background go out. And it becomes... You know what it's like. You can practically feel the wet moss on your knee as you're leaning down, if you're kneeling down, and you can kind of smell that kind of, you know, mossy grass, damp coolness. So you can play around with that. Now, interestingly, this year barely had we got the snowdrops, and then suddenly I noticed just a couple of days ago the crocuses. And crocuses really do feel to me like the first proper hint of spring as such, and following on the tail of the crocuses will be the daffodils. So there's this kind of, you know, you get the snowdrops, then you get the crocuses, then you get the daffodils. And then maybe you start getting pansies and what have you. And there are particular flowers that sort of mark this sort of, we're getting closer to spring. We're getting closer, we're getting closer, we're getting closer. We're not out of winter yet, because at the same time, like the cover photo, the card that I used for the episode card for this, this was taken, I think, 2 years ago, exactly the same time of year. You've got a crocus, but it's actually pushing up through the snow. At the moment we don't have snow, and so I got this the other day. But again, it's that notion, in this case, backlight. The backlight here is allowing the light to come through and just really capture and lighten up through the petals. And you can also see the stamen itself that sort of sits in the middle of it is actually casting a shadow against the inside of the petals as well. And crocuses, get them in a variety of colours. The purple really sort of stands out against the green of grass, or against the white and the blue of the snow. But again, whether it's this one on the edge or it's this one, that notion that you get really down low. And again, it's back to I love what I can do with the phone, that you can just absolutely get right down and tuck it underneath the flower. So you can, if in the case of this, the flower itself is now sitting above the horizon, and then you're cutting the horizon through the middle and you're creating a very kind of simple shape. This 3 colours, purple, blue, white. Almost feels like it should be a flag of some kind. But it's you know, don't underestimate this. It's such a great tool for when you're in February, and it's this thing, that I suppose really what I'm trying to get across. Maybe it's not a problem for anybody else. Maybe it's just me. But I tend to feel if it's a problem for me, it might be a problem for some of the others, which is why some other people, which is why I'm trying to get across this point. That for me, February is such a kind of grim month, only exceeded in grimness by January. But what can we do with photography? We're photographers. We want to click. We feel kind of itchy and just not comfortable if we haven't taken some kind of photo, if we spent too many days indoors. And just going out for a walk and just having your phone with you and just being able to spot things. Now, it might be there's a weather pattern moving across the landscape. It might be there's a frozen loch, but it might also be that there's just a crocus or a snowdrop or something just poking itself out of the snow or out of the frost or out of the grass, or even there's an old pair of boots sitting that have got a bit of frost on them. There's stuff to be able to photograph. You should never feel short of stuff to photograph. It doesn't have to be dramatic landscapes. It doesn't have to be cool street photography. It doesn't have to be specially prepared, set up still life. It doesn't have to be studio portraiture. That you really can just get something with a basic camera or phone or something like that. And there's so much out there to photograph, to explore. And even if these photos don't end up as something which end up, you know, going into competitions and winning competitions, they can still be deeply satisfying that you're capturing something out of what felt like nothing. And this is hopefully what I'm really trying to break you free of, is the idea that there's nothing to photograph. Because when I started this, you know, already, I sort of, you know, a couple of comments right back, you know, earlier on is essentially, yeah, everything's just kind of grey and browns, and really is there anything much to, you know, it just kind of feels like there's nothing really to photograph. And yet if we look, there is. And then so what was that? Let's see, a couple more comments there. Oh yeah, Susan says snowdrops and crocuses, a sure sign spring will come. April says, love the stamen shadow. VG loves the beautiful purple flower. Becca says, I might try some indoor shots of forced bulbs, etc. in pretty pots. Yeah, well, if you've certainly got... Yeah, I mean, we're now just sort of starting to die back. But we had a hydrangea in the kitchen recently, you know, one of those things, a nice little potted plant we got for Christmas. And, yeah, if you've got plants indoors, there's always plenty of colour to find there as well. April says January to March is the worst. Yeah, I kind of tend to feel that. But yes, but this is the point, is that that's what we're trying to still find interest within it. Adrian says, VG, I think the saffron comes from the centre of that purple flower. Saffron from crocus? I don't know. Somebody else will have to correct me on that one. It's a different area, completely out with my knowledge zone. But final thing to think of as well for those that that are into it is the notion of wildlife photography. And again, to my surprise, when I was going back through, I found this. I've got this picture of a red squirrel. This was taken in February, and there's no leaves on the trees. You've just got the moss on the trees. A little bit of sunlight glinting through. This is taken down at Dalbeattie Woods. So if you happen to be into your wildlife photography, you've got a nice big zoom lens or anything like that, and you want to go out shooting squirrels or anything like that, or even just cows in a field, there's still plenty, there's animal opportunities. And on top of that, even on the indoors, this was one that I found I took last year, and this one was taken on my phone. In February, I was sometimes... It is this weird thing. I've noticed this in the kind of middle of winter, in February time. Suddenly, these little butterflies will appear. In this case, I think it's a red admiral. Is it, or is it? I don't know. I don't know. It might not be. It might. I think there's another one that's quite close to a red admiral. It could be that one because this has got blue bits on the tips of the wings. I don't know my butterflies. If anybody does know their butterflies and goes, I know what that is, just drop it into the comments. But there was sometimes suddenly find by the window or something, butterflies which in the warmth of the house have kind of emerged as such. But they tend to be very sleepy and slow, and they're not kind of flittering about. And this one was over by the window, and I just kind of put my hand gently down to it, and it just kind of crawled onto my fingertips. So while it's on my fingertips with this hand, I'm desperately trying to open my phone and press all the buttons and what have you, so I could take a quick shot of it. But, you know, even the butterflies, if they're going to sit still for you, beautiful colouring, beautiful textures. So there's options there as well. So really what I wanted to say here is that notion that there is so much to play with in February. And it doesn't just have to be the weather's rotten outside, therefore I'll have to do some kind of still life on the inside. You can, of course, do still life on the inside, and if you want to do still life, make the most of the winter months, because, you know, in the summer you probably want to be outdoors. But what we're really talking about here, though, is that if you are going outdoors and you do want to go into nature or anything, there's a whole raft of way of things you can do. You can look for weather moving patterns, you can look for frozen bits, you can do big scenes, you can do small scenes, you can do close-ups, you can do street scenes, but in it, if there isn't really that much colour there, lean into that. You know, say, well, okay, can we still what can we do with light and dark? What can we do with sort of shades? What can we do with contrasts? And there's so many options. And hopefully then what I've done is I've kind of maybe, well, the idea is to try and inspire you a little bit. Because what we're going to do next is I'm going to set the challenge. So first challenge, proper challenge that we're having for 2025 is going to be the February Nature Challenge. Now, okay, fine, you can go and dig through your archives if you really have nothing. But I'm giving you 2 weeks, okay? It's the 9th of February today, so on the 16th of February, we will have the image. So try and get the images, don't leave it until the 23rd. Friday 21st really is kind of as late as you can. A little bit depends on how many I get coming through. But certainly absolutely no later than Saturday the 22nd, and if it's going to turn up at that, make sure it's early in the morning UK time. The later it gets left, the less chance there is for me to kind of organise these podcasts and put the pictures in. But what I want you to do is I want your interpretation of February nature, okay? So it can be big landscape, it can be weather patterns, it can be frost and ice, or it can be that early spring, summer, it can be flowers pushing up. Or, again, in India, VG, you know, if there's stuff that you're wanting to do, which tends to feel a little bit more like stuff that goes on at this time of year, something about that kind of February midwinter kind of thing. Or if you happen to be watching this back, somebody from the southern hemisphere, where it's mid to late summer down there, that's fine too. This is a February thing, February nature. I'm happy to accept, you know, if you're in South Africa or you're in Australia or anything like that, or equatorial, just give me your February interpretation here. That's good. I mean, I'm talking mostly about kind of frost and ice and mist and coldness, because that's where I'm based and that's where the majority of the people who are commenting are coming from. But I'm happy to accept a February interpretation from absolutely anywhere in the world. So this is your challenge then. Come up with an image, and then where are we? Places, either send it to me, email it to me, kim@kimairs.co.uk, which I've suddenly realised I don't have on this. I might have to just change this bit here. But we also have the group. There's the Facebook group, the usual Facebook group. So Facebook/groups/UPwKA, UPwKA, which is obviously Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, right? But don't forget now, we also have the Flickr group to play around with, which is Flickr/groups/UPwKA. Okay, so and I really want to try and encourage you to go and visit and sign up to Flickr and start operating using the Flickr group. So far, we've just got a dozen members, and a couple of people have put things in, and then it's gone quiet. But we need to kind of get it going. So I would really like to encourage you to go there, start a discussion thread, answer something else in a discussion thread, join in a discussion thread, just post something, maybe revisit it once or twice a week just to sort of see if there's anything else there. Because I think once that gets going, that's going to allow us to sort of do much more in between. So get your images, either place them into the discussion thread that's in the UPwKA site on the Flickr group, or if you're happy doing it in the Facebook group, where we usually do, place your image in the Facebook group, or email it to me directly, kim@kimairs.co.uk. Either way, whichever way you do it, also leave a little explanation of what it is. Say something about the photo, maybe why you took it, any interesting little anecdotes that go with it, what it was about the scene in front of you that grabbed your attention and made you think that you'd like to take a photo of it, or anything like that. I think the stories that accompany the photos are just as much part of the fun of it, especially, not always, I mean, when you're looking at photos, scrolling through screens, maybe you're not interested in the background. But for our group here, for Understanding Photography, I think it helps with all of us. It's not just about taking the photo, it's about motivations, it's about what caught our eye, it's about how the approach we took, why we decided to take something from this angle rather than that angle, why we decided to use these settings on our camera rather than those settings on our camera. And I think when we share this information, it's useful to everybody else in the group as well. So tell us something a little bit about that as well, because I think that's really kind of a fascinating part of what we're doing here. A couple more comments. What have we got here? Oh, April says that's an amazing catch. No, Rebecca says Saffron Walden in England was so called because of the Crocus sativus. The saffron crocus was grown there in large quantities. Aha. And where are we? Okay, yeah. Becca says gorgeous butterfly. Jeffrey says red cardinals, blue jays, bluebirds, yellow finches and woodpeckers are also really nicely concentrated with a white snowy background. That's true. If you can get bird colours, especially garden birds, you know, the blue tits and robins or anything like that, against a kind of a dull background, they will show up. Janet says I was trying cardinal and blue jays this morning, even saw a chickadee bury himself in the snow. Jeffrey says, sounds like a fantastic February challenge. Excellent. I hope you will join in with us. Becca says, looking forward to this challenge. Now, just a little thing to go back to that notion of the Flickr group, which I do want to put across, is this idea that, so I'm going to, next week, just to talk about next week, in between, so we've got now 2 weeks' time there's going to be a challenge. Next week, I'm going to be talking about wedding photography. And specifically the idea of what you do when a friend asks you to take photos at their wedding. I'm sure quite a few of you will have had this experience. And if you are not a wedding photographer, perhaps your first response is, oh, you know, I feel honoured to do that. How lovely. They know we take photos. They like our photography. They want us to photograph one of the most special days of their life. How honour, you know, and before you know it, you're nodding away and saying yes. And then suddenly it dawns on you the massive level of responsibility and all the things that can possibly go wrong, and the horror of it, of what you've actually agreed to. And at that point, what can you do? And so that's what I'm going to explore next week. Okay, so if you ever have found yourself, or are likely to find yourself, suddenly dragged into, oh, and could you photograph our wedding for us? I'm going to explore what that means. And this comes actually out of a question I got from Nuria. Nuria has sent me a message specifically saying that's what's happened to her. She has been asked by a friend to photograph their wedding and is desperately looking for tips and tricks. So what I'm going to do is, in the UPwKA group, the Flickr group, I'll put in a little strand about photographing weddings. And then what I would like anybody who's had any experience of it, whether you have actually done it for a friend, whether you've supported somebody else doing it for a friend, whether you just were there with your phone and you found some interesting ways of doing it, I would like you to populate your little stories and anecdotes into it. And then what will happen is that will help Nuria, because it's not just me, it's what other people's experiences are. And then also, if I find anything particularly interesting which I feel I can will add to the podcast next week, then I can take some of this information and bring it out into the podcast as well. Okay, so this is where I kind of feel like the group will come in handy, is where we can kind of explore and expand. So it's not just me and my experiences and my insight, but it's you and your insights and experiences as well get brought into it. And then that way, everybody gets a richer, fuller understanding of photography, which of course is what the title of this podcast is all about. So I'm really hoping that you will do something with that. Okay. And of course, quick little reminder here that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. So meantime, bring your friends along, get everybody else involved, join the group, start thinking about photos that you're going to do for the February challenge. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you'll come up with. A couple of last comments here. What have we got? Becca said she's looking forward to the challenge. Visi says looking forward, maybe the foggy mornings continue for the next week. Yeah, well, you can do that. That'd be fantastic, VG. Adrian says, are you creating a new Flickr discussion about the wedding? Yes, I will. I will set up one specifically for that. I was kind of hoping Nuria might have set one up, but she hasn't been back there yet, I think. So if she hasn't, then I will set up one specifically for your wedding ideas. Check it in about an hour or so. Jeffrey says, I shot my first roll of 120 film on a faux TRL. 1948 Spartacus was a project with 20 others. I had film sweats waiting for the lab now. Right, is that to do with weddings? I've missed missed something there. Okay, John says, the challenge of doing wedding photos is something I avoid because of the chance of disaster. And VG says, have a great weekend, everyone. Right, okay, so I think that pretty much brings us to the end. So thank you to everybody for taking your time to comment. Like I say, start thinking about the February challenge. Also, in about an hour or so, pop over to the group and join in with the chat with any of your wedding photo opportunities. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.